I will give them a few more seconds while I read out Iona's bio, which is very exciting. So Iona's a product designer by training, but a science and data geek at heart. Hands up any other science and data geeks at heart. Yeah. Woo! Among friends. After developing a fascination with genetics, in 2015 she launched .1, which we're going to hear about today, which is a DNA personalized design company. I mean, how awesome does that sound? So a one-liner for your company, that's pretty sweet. So aside from .1, Iona consults for various biotech startups in London. I'm going to shut up and let her take over.
Well, thanks a lot. Hi everyone.
Round of applause then.
Yeah, my name's Iona. I'm a product designer. But yeah, I've always just loved sort of science and data, and I eventually, after sort of 27 years, found a way of tying these things together. So it's been a bit of a technical glitch. So my video doesn't have any sound, so I'm going to live narrate the audio. So please, I apologise for that. There's no music, so just imagine it's going to be way better than it is. But here we go. So I'll show you sort of the brand film for the company first, and then I'll go back a bit about the story and then go into sort of genetics and design things. So this. Oh wait, you can kind of. Can you hear that at all? A little bit. Okay, I'll just know what's going out, isn't it? Okay, this is Peter. Peter shares 50% of his DNA with this banana, and 94% of his DNA with this dog. In fact, Peter shares 99.9% of his DNA with you and everyone else in this room. Which just leaves 0.1%, which makes you you. So let's discover what that means. So from a simple cheek swab, your DNA is extracted and analysed. In a process called DNA profiling, you can be identified from the other 7.4 billion people in the world. So this is sort of a forensic test that they do. And they extract your DNA and you get a sort of unique code which reveals different points in your genome which is unique to you. And .1 have created an algorithm which converts this genetic data into colour, generating like a visual print which only you in the world would have. So these brothers turned out to be 78% genetically identical, and their prints kind of emulate that in colours. And these identical twins were 100% genetically identical. For families, we do DNA family trees where you get a whole family sort of genome tested, and you can start to track sort of gene inheritance from one generation to the next. So even though you take 50-50 from each parent, from your grandparents, you might inherit some genes more from your grandmother than your grandfather, or from your sort of mum's mum and mum's dad. So it sort of creates genetic variation in people. So the company I started basically just visualizes people's DNA in a way which is familiar to them and that they can understand, and sort of it's a sort of a tangible thing instead of this sort of language that no one seems to be able to sort of tap into. So the video is much better online, so please watch it again there. So I'll starting back to about sort of 20 years ago, a bit about my history. So I always just loved science and making, and these two things, like science and arts, always seemed quite separate, or I always got told that if you like science and maths, you probably not very good at English and art, or these things didn't really go together. So as a child, I was slightly unconventional. My dad had, he was a doctor, and he had a medical skeleton, like an actual human skeleton before the plastic ones came in. And he kept hold of him when we were growing up. And we called him Uncle for some really weird reason. And I used to spend like hours a day like building the skeleton in my bedroom and like learning all the names of the bones and how to join it all together. And so like I just spent hours and hours just like playing with this thing. So fast forward 20 years, I've done quite a lot of work at Imperial College doing synthetic biology, and kind of this love of sort of biology kind of continued. And then sort of the other channel is making. So there's a picture of me as a potter at a very young age. And then again, fast forward 20 years, doing some metal work. And so always sort of making and science are these two things which I loved. So I went down the sort of design route and studied textiles at Chelsea College, which I ended up hating. And my grad textiles show actually was some wood lighting work. And my tutors just told me that they didn't know what to do with me. And I graduated a textile degree with no textile skills, and really no skills at all. And I was living in London with like £20,000 worth of debt, thinking like, I really want to escape from here and work out what I want to do. So I escaped quite dramatically to here, and I ended up spending about a year living in the Arctic, training sled dogs for exploration purposes, which seems really random, but makes some sense to me somehow. And at the time, I had an A-level in biology, and so I was the second most qualified person in the region for like veterinary things. So I ended up being enlisted to like help out on operations, doing stitches, like taking out staples, doing all the meds, doing all the med checks for the dogs. Really not legally allowed here at all, I think. And so I started getting really into biology again, just thinking like, oh god, I'm so interested in this, in the science, and like there is something really creative about science, and they must go together somehow. This is just a nice fact. So Osmond, who's wearing the pants, he actually had frostbite on his balls. And one of my jobs when I was there was to design, because I had a textiles degree, design some like furry ball warmers for him, which he literally hated. So just thought I'd put that one in there because he thought they were really embarrassing. So I came back with this idea that I love science, I love art, I like design, I'm going to do something about it. So I did a master's at the Royal College, and I started working on this sort of project about data. Because I noticed that there's like a big data sort of driven theme through all my design work, and I started to sort of think about links between things. So I'd gone to Bletchley Park and seen the Enigma machine and all the teleprinters, and started thinking about coding, and I'd done some synthetic biology, so I was thinking about genetics. And at the same time, I was actually doing a weaving project with a company in Scotland, and they have a very sort of analog sort of system for weaving, but it looks extremely like binary data. So I started sort of mapping data against each other. So this is a code for a weaving machine. Next to it is a teleprinter code for communications, and there's binary code for lots of digital data, and a genetic code. And I was just thinking like, these things just look so similar, and I started to understand patterns of programming kind of span across so many different things, and actually the output seems different, but actually code is very much like a universal language for everything. And actually even genetics, it might seem different because it's made up of 4 bases. You can convert that into binary and vice versa. So Microsoft at the moment is putting so much money into a project where they're storing digital data in DNA because it's so much more efficient and can last for so long that it's really hard to corrupt. And actually they've worked out statistically you could store all of the world's sort of digital data in the amount of DNA to fill up a teaspoon. And that's nuts. And it could last for 500 years without being corrupted or sort of, I don't know, it's like an incredible project. So that's what they're working on. So there's kind of swapping data between different life forms or machines. And the other thing I was really interested in about the way sort of we are is sort of the idea of identity in a sort of a materialistic way or design way. And one of the big things I kept thinking about when I was working with a Scottish company was about tartan, and how like this is like a fabric which like really represents a family in like a really prestigious way. And so in the Scottish weaving company they had a big catalogue of all the tartan fabrics and all the names, and I love this idea of this affiliation between the pattern and the family, and it's recognisable and they're beautiful. And actually I found out that it's not really a Scottish thing, and it's not even that sort of new, and that about 3,000 years ago there was a man in China wearing tartan leggings which were woven, and they found, he's a mummy, so they found that not too long ago, just showing this idea of like tartan was around so much longer than we thought and completely on the other side of the world. So this idea of sort of families and materials representing families is ancient and like trans sort of everywhere. And also in Japan. So this is a sort of swatch look of ribbons which are Japanese samurai used to wrap around their swords before going into battle, and it would like each ribbon would represent a different family's sort of honour, and they'd go into battle with this like coloured bit of material, and that would represent their family, and if they lost it, I guess given their sword, and then their sort of family's honour would be sort of go with it. And so I just love this idea that in those different cultures, like woven coloured fabric just was like really representative of their families. And I'm guessing these are American families. I just love that even modern day, like people, the way that they dress really identifies who they are or what they do, and so these like really awkward family photos, or even uniforms, and or like subculture clothes like goths, and you can identify people, and it's just like the way you look, and it's like kind of how you dress. So tying this all together, so thinking about sort of heritage and sort of material culture and this data thing, I started looking into my own family, and my family had been obsessed with family trees for hundreds of years. So my dad is David there. So this goes back to sort of 18 something. We held one for hundreds of years before that. And I really wanted to update this tradition of sort of understanding where you come from. And genetics is a really good way now of sort of updating the idea of an old family tree. So I DNA tested my whole family, which was slightly nerve-wracking at some point, because it's also the test of paternity testing. And I think in America, 1 in 8 people their fathers aren't who they think they are. So it's like really, really, really shockingly high. So the company I started, I'm still like, luckily I've never found anything awful, but it could happen. So with the sort of DNA testing, it's for forensic identification. It's a minimum amount of data you need to identify someone as an individual. These are just 23 different locations along the genome, and then a number about how many times a certain code is repeated. So this is what it looks like in data form, and that's not really relatable. So I started thinking about it in colour, because that's something that I have a visual memory. So this is kind of what I devised, like a colour number scheme. Really simple, and just repeated it to make patterns. And so, because my parents are the same ethnicity, their variation in numbers is quite similar, because they'll have quite a common ancestor, like not too long ago, like thousands of years hopefully, but not like millions. But me and my sister at the bottom, we were, I think, like 80-something% identical, and our patterns are really, really similar. So you could visually see straight away sort of how you compare to people, how you differ from people. So I started coming up with this idea of sort of creating fabrics using people's genetics to code them. And that was kind of like my final project for the university. I had this sort of material woven, it was my family's like tartan, and it was this idea of like intrinsic identification through materials. And after that I started working for a genetics company, and found there was a lot of problems with the public engagement in genetics in general, and misconception of what it means, and lots of fear around it, and people just thinking of like designer babies and like mutations, and just like not understanding the positives of understanding about your own DNA, or about understanding about everybody else's and how it can be positive for healthcare, sort of lifestyle, and it has so many positive things. So I thought, what about setting up a company which uses design to kind of positively engage the public in like a fun way, where they start getting used to consumer products which are personalised to them in like a new way, and then also being able to spread some sort of serious messages or some interesting facts along the way. So I set up Dot One last December. Used a software engineer to create sort of an algorithm which automatically converts the data. Created like an official partnership with a lab in Newcastle, which is where I'm from, and sort of set up things to manufacturers, and then launched the website around Christmas last year. And it went really well. I was a bit sort of worried about whether people would get it or not, but it got picked up by a few bits of press. And what I really, really liked was that sort of science started getting into fashion magazines, and fashion started getting onto science journals and blogs. And so there was one article which was about Alzheimer's, and then there's another bit about these DNA scars. And I was kind of just like loving how this kind of design and science started to merge together. And I just felt like that was great, people in this beauty magazine learning about genetics. And I just kind of really like this idea of sort of breaking down the barriers between the two. But from the backlash of that, I also got quite a lot of really negative comments, which is always quite funny. So I made a whole folder of haters at Christmas. But it's just really useful as well to see that what people are fearful of. Maybe I wasn't communicating things right because they were coming up with things which were completely impossible. And just like, I don't know, it's quite fun to have such like strong hate. And sort of people arguing with other people, and just like, it's an interesting topic. So I kind of love that it creates conversations in ways that you might not realise. So this is some of the project for people. This shows kind of like how the different designs come out. And yeah, some customers. Also going to do a sports range using data to do with sort of health and fitness. And all the products come with like an illustrated guide to DNA and genetics, so it talks you through in like a really easy way from like start to finish about like why you are the way you are, how it works, and how closely related you are to other things. So yeah, 50% banana, 75% pumpkin, about 18% bacteria, and 26% some sort of pond weed or something. So it makes you feel really special. But also kind of nice that everyone's like everything. The world is one in some way. Yeah. So that was like kind of the first 6 months. And I actually didn't really know anything about genetics when I started, so it's been very much like just like learning as I'm going, and it's so fascinating and it's opened so many doors. And I learned quite early on about these two companies, especially one called 23andMe. And I don't know, has anyone done the 23andMe test here? A few people. So basically, they can tell you all sorts of things about yourself. Some sort of healthcare related, some physical trait things, doing ancestry, and it's kind of the idea that your body has all this information, and someone now is able to read it because it's all in there already, but you just don't know. And I think it's fascinating that a company can like decode yourself. And the reason that this is possible now is that about 15 years ago, when the first time they sequenced a whole genome, it cost $100 million. And last year, there's another company called Illumina did the same test. So in 15 years forward from that, it's $999. So from 100 million to 999 in 15 years, like nothing decreases at that rate. Like it's insane. So things have started to come because of technology advancing, prices reducing. Like the doors to science have just been like thrown open. And like probably in like 5 years' time, maybe it'll cost like £100 or £10, and everyone will have the whole genome sequenced at birth and can like sort out a whole load of health problems before it even starts. So these are a few things I learned. I learned that I am in the top 13% of people who are the most Neanderthal in the world, which apparently is quite offensive because it means heavy eyebrow ridge, bigger skull, prominent nose. I'm just really not an attractive guy, and I'm the most of all my friends, which is great. I also found out like where I'm from, which is really boring, like Northern European, which is a surprise. But I was 0.3% Southeast Asian, which was so cool. And I devised from the percentages that it was like my great grandfather 13 generations ago must have done something. So it's just like so fascinating to find out the stuff about yourself. And apart from the physical things, which are interesting, obviously about percentage of having red hair or blonde hair or blue eyes, they're starting to understand more about that it's actually nature over nurture, which is determining lots of sort of other traits about you as well. So there's always been this kind of nature-nurture battle. But in the 60s in America, they started doing some really horrible studies where they would get identical twins who obviously are genetically identical, and they must have been adopted or orphaned or something, and they would split them up and send one to like a really privileged, educated family, and send one to like a family who are probably like below average educated or really impoverished. And they would study them over time, so they would give them completely opposite upbringings. And it did turn out that the children, although very different, like underlying kind of characteristics maintained to be the same, showing that it was their genetics, which was like very strong, rather than their upbringing on lots of aspects. And it can like affect your personality, I think, your genetics. So you can look up from your 23andMe test, you can look up in other research papers about different things. So I looked up this sort of SNP, which is like a region, and it says if you have this combination of bases, then you're going to have maybe lack of empathy or be optimistic and empathetic. And I looked at mine and I was double G, so I was like, great, I'm the good one for that. But you can find out loads of things about yourself, and it's kind of maybe like a bit horoscopy still, but it seems quite accurate in a lot of ways, and the more people are finding out, the more they're studying these things, and it's becoming like a bit more scientific, whether you're like a worry, like, and how if you have anxiety, or if you're a bit more of a fighter, or if you're shy. So there's so many different things you can learn about yourself. I started partnering with this company, 23andMe, in America. So now customers already have their data, can buy products, and a percentage of all the products sort of profit goes to this charity called the Neuro Foundation, which supports people affected by neurofibromatosis, which is a genetic disorder. So it's starting to be quite nice to tie in sort of charity links and more education and sort of social good through the kind of like a fun project. So these are the new range of scars, which are all to do with sort of physical traits. So you can have them and stand next to someone and you can see like how genetically similar you are, but to do with things like if you like the taste of coriander, or if you are likely to have the same colour eyes or hair colour and things. So it's just a bit of fun, but just using the genetic data. And the final thing I'm going to talk about, which is what I'm wanting to push the company into more, is to do some work with healthcare organisations. And one of the biggest things is precision medicine. So basically when you go to a doctor now, everyone just goes in and comes out with pretty much the same medicine, which seems crazy because actually, although we're very similar, there is a bit of us which is different. And you would never go into a shoe shop and just ask for a shoe and come out with a shoe. Like, it seems crazy that with your healthcare, you just, there's like one shoe fits all kind of idea is around. And some studies have shown that about 40% of people prescribed drugs either are really allergic to them or just won't optimally respond to them, and it causes the NHS like a lot of money, either people having to go back into hospital, prescribing more drugs, or people actually getting ill from the medication they're taking, or their original problem getting worse. So now they're devising that because of your genetics, you can be prescribed like sets of drugs which are going to optimally respond to you. And it's called precision medicine, and it's already starting to happen. And through 23andMe, I found out that this drug that I had taken before wouldn't work for me, and it didn't. And if I'd known that before, I could have gone to my doctor and said, like, I won't respond to this, give me something else, and it would have saved so much more time and money and effort for everybody. And the other thing is about prevention. So learning about your genetics can make you understand about what is sort of happening in the future. So instead of your medical history, you look to your medical future, and you can actually stop things before they even happen. Again, save so much money, save so much time, you can just have a much healthier population. And I went to a talk recently, and it was one of the co-founders of Thriver Health, and he said this, and that just really stuck with me, that like in dentistry, prevention is something that we do every day. And so your teeth seem fine, but every day, every single person brushes their teeth in the morning and in the evening. And like that's like an activity that you do, and everyone does it, and it's like a thing you do, and actually you're just preventing gum disease, you're preventing like loads of different things. But in medicine, you don't do this thing every day to like prevent something like specific. And like imagine if you had that kind of routine in like different sort of medical situations where you find out from an early age you're predisposed to something, and then you can just like build it into your daily life to have this like sort of prevention regime, or change your diet, or change your fitness, or so many sort of possibilities. So it's really exciting the sort of research they're doing now to make the whole population healthier. I started working, this is sort of the last slide, started working with East London Genes and Health, so I live in Hackney, and I was actually born in East London, and so that area is really great. And then they're setting up a new genome centre there, which is studying just Bangladeshi and Pakistani populations, because they found out that they have 5 to 6 times the rate of diabetes than any other ethnicity, which is huge, like that's a lot. And diabetes is linked to heart disease, and so they really wanted to find out like why this is happening. So they're trying to test about 100,000 people of these sort of ethnic origins in East London, and they have building this whole new genome centre just to research this, find out why it's happening, and if they can change this. So I've recently done some work with them about sort of communication to people who, it's quite hard to sometimes tap into communities, especially with genetics. It's the most personal thing possible. But I think design is like a really good tool for like public engagement, people getting sort of on board and interested in things, and this kind of merging between science and design is really starting to happen in lots of different areas. People are seeing the importance of it. So Dot1 in general is like a bit of a consultancy for big sort of hospitals and the biotech companies, and it's kind of own sort of platform for a bit of fun engagement in science. That's my story. Thanks for listening.
I'm really sorry for it. Again, very pushed for time, so I'm going to squeeze questions to just one very quick question, and then anyone else can grab Iona in the break. So if anyone's got one, there we go.
Hi. How are you dealing with data security and preventing the customer from not sharing their personal data with anyone but you?
So with the 23andMe customers, they have like a special API system where basically your customer, when they buy a product, they get sent a link and they just give Dot1 access to like a tiny part of the genome. So it's like we only take about 200 SNPs out of like 600,000 that they have on their profile. So basically the customer just has to allow us to have access, and we don't store it anywhere. It just like downloads into a design file straight off, and then we get it manufactured. So we don't actually store anything. It's more like 23andMe store and all their data. For the customers that I have through Dot1, we design our own DNA test, which then we store the data for that. So we just have to get people to sign off an agreement that we are allowed to store it for 3 months in a secure way, and that after 3 months we will destroy it. But because it's a physical object, it just becomes quite hard. So we physically send prints with the DNA profile to our printers, and it gets sent through the post. So it's kind of clear to people when they buy it that this is something which has to happen, and it just has to be up to them if they're happy with it or not. And what I do say is for the people who are doing that test, is that the data we get from that doesn't signify anything about sort of health or sort of health data. It's kind of like what they still call junk data. So it doesn't really signify anything. That's just your like unique part that all forensics teams use. The only thing it could be used for is actually defending for a crime. So I just don't do it. But it's one of these issues where you can be careful to an extent, but part of the reason that it's like a physical thing just makes it really hard to protect.
I think in fact some of that same theme might come through in our next talk, which is a fantastic segue, which is on justice and data. And a final fantastic round of applause.